ultimately, the poor werewolf, he's such a schmuck, you know? I mean, there's a wonderful joke, okay? This, to me, defines the werewolf. There's a husband and wife are having an argument in Los Angeles. And finally, she says, I'm not arguing with any of you. Forget it. The argument's over. He says, what do you mean? She goes, it's useless, it's pathetic, it's a waste of time. He goes, oh, yeah? She goes, yeah. And you know why? He says, why? She says, because you're a schmuck. He goes, I'm a schmuck. She says, no, you're not a schmuck. You are the schmuck. If the city of Los Angeles needed an official schmuck, you know, to represent the city in a statewide, if California needed the California state, wait a minute, if the United States needed an American schmuck, if there was a U.S. schmuck to represent it at the International Schmuck Olympics, if the world needed a schmuck, if there was a competition for schmuck of the world, you would get second place. He says, well, why would I get second place? She says, because you're a schmuck. And that's what I feel about the Wolfman. The guy cannot win.
Aren't you gonna say I told you so?
If I were still alive, I probably would. But I did tell you so, you schmuck.
So, when I was a kid, and trust me, I already want to click off the video too. Whenever a review starts off, or a critique, as I like to call them because I'm pretentious as fuck, whenever someone starts off a critique with when I was a kid, I just think, oh no, it's going to be one of those nostalgic, grossly sentimental kinds of reviews. And this is not that. Trust me. We'll go into an American Werewolf in London in a pretty deep kind of context. We'll do a pretty substantive, substantial reading of the film in just a moment. But it would be kind of critically dishonest of me not to mention. Not to imbibe this review with some sort of sentimentality. When I was a kid, this film was one of my introductions to the horror genre. I remember having the VHS tape. It's a very, visceral memory. And, watching it now. This film, of course, it was made in a very deliberately visceral kind of way. It's a very visceral and unforgiving sort of horror film. It's like I could feel it. It's like I could feel this movie. And not just the transformation scene, which is the best transformation scene I've ever seen, still to this day. But even the romance in the shower, the kissing, the tactile nature of John Landis's composition. I remember experiencing that kind of visceral response to the film when I was a child and first getting into horror, and it's still potent now, if not even more potent, because I have that kind of almost postmodern memory that I can feel what I felt then as a child, and I can still feel it now with more knowledge, and it really just helps this film become something beyond itself. This is a film that is dynamic becoming and not static being. There's so much, there's a visceral texture to this film. There's so many different visceral kinds of textures to this film that it's more than horrific, it's more than absurd, it's deeply masterful and flawless, in my opinion. And my introduction to the horror genre was that visceral feeling, that visceral emotion, that visceral sensation, the unforgiving sensation of horror films. And that's how you know you're in the presence of a good horror film. Of course, I did not know that when I was a child. But growing up, the films that stick with you, especially the more horrific and gruesome ones, the more macabre ones, those are the ones that you didn't just feel, but somehow they may have felt you as well. John Landis is really, really fucking cool, actually. I kind of, I underestimated just how cool he was, because I would be watching this movie now with my adult eyes, with my admittedly over-analytical eyes, and I would start to go into a lot of grim philosophical and psychological detail in my analysis, in where the film was directing me. And I would have to take a step back and go, no, John Landis obviously didn't mean this. he couldn't have meant all of these different complicated and sophisticated things. Then when you watch an interview with him, he just kind of fesses up to all of it in the most like authentic way possible. There's no like pretension to the man. There's no snobbery to the man. Like, I was watching this film and thought that there was a bit of a Buñuel influence, and he comes right out and says that the film is directly inspired by Buñuel, not knowing which reality that you are inside of, the discrete charm of the bourgeoisie. And then one of these Buñuel-inspired nightmare sequences, I think holds the most frightening imagery of the film. I've done other videos on this channel where I talk about werewolves, and specifically I talk about like the fascist fascinations with werewolves, with the transformative fascist power of the symbol of the werewolf metaphor. And in one of these nightmare sequences, David is a Jewish American kid, and he's watching the Muppets on television with his family, and then they are completely ambushed and attacked, and he and his family are all slaughtered by these werewolves in Nazi outfits, by these SS werewolves, by these Nazi werewolves. They break into his house and they slit his throat and murder his entire family while he's watching the Muppets. And that was this kind of direct alignment with Holocaust metaphors and Holocaust symbolic languages is so pure to the kind of fascist foundations of the werewolves. It's insane. But Landis also affords the more common reading of the film. He even talks about Rick Baker, who was an amazing special effects artist who did all the effects in this film. The transformation was incredible. And the transformation, John Landis even says that it's like horrific. The human form is weird. This is about adolescence and like raging hormones. He even, in his own words, essentially it's an erection metaphor. You know, he does that like that chuckle that I actually find really charming, but it really is an erection metaphor. And I'm watching it thinking, I can't say on a video that this is about your dick getting hard. But that's exactly what it's about. And if I could just speak personally for a second, werewolves are sad, tragic, and painful figures. A good werewolf movie, the werewolf spends most of his time contemplating suicide. One of my favorite scenes in An American Werewolf in London is when he's in the dirty movie theater brainstorming ways to kill himself with all these zombies, with all these people that he's killed, with all the undead and his best friend, all these zombies trying to figure out, hey, you can kill yourself, you can hang yourself, jump in front of a trolley. It's brilliantly absurd. The gallows humor in this film is insane. It's still completely a horror film. It's just the mentality of the characters involved see the absurdity of their situation, so they recognize and they identify what is absurd, and then get swallowed up by what is at the truly horrific center of this film, which is tragedy. And if I could speak personally, I'm a schmuck. For sure. I wish I had some of you guys in my real life to kind of prevent me from fucking up everything in my own life. I'm a very unpredictable sort of character. I like to go on benders, like to go on ragers, like to go absolutely fucking crazy with drugs and alcohol and women. I like to just go fucking bonkers, man. It's almost like I get off to the idea of ruining my own life. Like this, I am every cliche, self-destructive concept is like rolled into one ball of like nervy wires. I'm just a ball of nerves, essentially, with a lot of self-destructive qualities and enough dark ambition to see those things through. And I do turn into a different person when I'm intoxicated, when I'm fucked up. We all do, right? And I'm still battling with what feels like things that were never figured out in my hormone, like things that were never figured out in my youth, things I never really matured from or matured into. The werewolf metaphor really strikes a chord with me. And because, of course, when you act like a werewolf and you act like a monster, you are acting like the fascist ideal. And it's all about power. and you're kind of inflicting pain on others, and you are self-destructive, and you are selfish. You're just acting completely selfishly, but beyond that, in a John Landis interpretation, you're acting primally. And I think that the film is absolutely incredible because it makes me think about all of those things. It makes me think about my life within horror movie contexts. And it should. And I would like to talk a little bit more about just how funny the film is. Griffin Dunne, who plays Jack, his friend, is one of my favorite horror characters of all time. I love the concept of his character. So, of course, when the werewolf initially attacks them both and basically curses David into being a werewolf, he immediately kills his friend. But his friend pops up 3 more times as a zombie, as an undead. And each time you see him, he is deteriorating, disintegrating more and more. And it's wow, it's so cool. It's just amazing. It's just awesome. Of course, it's an apt metaphor for a friend from a certain kind of lifestyle, like losing himself more and more, becoming a shell of himself, becoming a ghost, of course, just becoming lost and wrapped into that lifestyle, or the memory of a friend who didn't survive the kind of alt lifestyle that you're trying to live, that you're pursuing. I always really I really respond heavily to both of these characters. Ever since I was a kid, I thought that the red jacket, the red coat, and the green coat that both the characters would wear, I thought those were iconic. And that's also a visceral feeling. I could feel the wetness of them, like the raindrops on them, and the design of the coat itself. Like I could feel it, I could feel my hands in the pockets of them because it's cold in the moors. I can beware the moon. When Beware the Moon becomes visceral, it's insane. There's a lot of irony in this film. I love that Blue Moon plays over the horrific, gruesome, and gory transformation. I love that Bad Moon Rising plays. I love the ending of the film. Perfect tragedy. David's just lying there, brutalized, murdered, and then cut to black. Like it's beyond its time. It's beyond itself, most importantly, and possibly a metaphysical way, because this film is really important. And in the horror genre, it does express so many important things. It can make you laugh, sure, but the sound editing, the cuts, the effects, the creature makeup, all of these things blend together to make a perfectly horrifying and honestly petrifying film. An American Werewolf in London is absolutely flawless in so many different ways. I've always been obsessed with this film. And I always try to learn from the film, but the great thing about horror films are you're not supposed to learn from them. If you learn a good lesson from a horror film, that means the horror film fucked up, in my opinion. So I think that horror films should be problematic. Horror films should be nearly fatalistic. Horror films should be dark. They should be morbidly absolutist as well. The werewolf is a tragedy, and there's no forgiveness in this film. There's no redemption. There's no way to cleanse yourself of the curse of the werewolf. You will die and you will hurt other people as well. There's no great lesson. There are great metaphors. There are great bits of irony, but you're doomed. Oof. Oof. And it's such a convincing gloominess because of the humor, because it's instantly relatable in that respect, because it recognizes its own absurdities. Also, Landis is saying something pretty interesting as well, because they spend a lot of time with media, different forms of media. Not only earlier when I mentioned they were watching the Muppets on television when the Nazi wolves came in and slaughtered everyone. David spends an unordinary amount of time watching trashy cable in the nurse's bedroom and in the nurse's home. He spends an ordinary amount of time watching trashy cable, flipping through the channels, and it's just garbage, 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 trash, trash, trash. And one of the most important scenes in the film, and ultimately the most tragic transformation of all, takes place inside of a dirty movie theater, where Landis takes the time to kind of expose how contrived the porn film itself is that they're watching, with terrible dialogue, with characters actually watching it, with the undead being within the audience of the film, and kind of critiquing the art itself. And it does ask, can this violence be art? But in An American Werewolf in London, we're almost entering this postmodern universe where art is no longer necessary. Like, art is no longer necessary to properly identify, because everywhere you look, it's kind of just vapid, and everywhere you look is trashy. Everywhere you look is absurd. While there's something horrifying about to tear its way tear its way from within you, and you're about to unleash all this hell upon the world just feels so out of sync. So, I wouldn't even say like blissfully arrogant or anything like that. It's just trash. It's just trash at that point. The world is bad comedy. And even when truly morbid, horrific, gruesome, and gory things are happening to you, the world isn't even in on that part of the joke. The world isn't even laughing at you. The world just doesn't get you, like they don't get a bad comedian at open mic. The world is bad comedy. And the true horror of the world is figuring out that you never really fit in at all. Hence why Landis chose Europe as the setting, and why our main characters are two doomed and tragic and brutalized American boys. Because they already don't belong. Maybe art doesn't belong in our world, and in this world it would have been the early 80s, 1981. I'm not sure if art belongs in the discussion anymore, because horrific things, no one cares if something horrific is art or trash. At the end of the day, things that are morbid, things that are macabre, it doesn't matter what they can be classified as. They're visceral, and they're moving. An American Werewolf in London is a positively intense experience. It's ridiculously entertaining. Every time I watch it, I feel like I'm experiencing a new film, and yet I can feel every aspect of it, almost through a cinephile muscle memory. It's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It's easily my favorite werewolf film. And it's one of my favorite horror movies ever made. I think it's perfect. I can't get enough of this film. I love it so much. I love it to death. I love it to death.